They called him a genius, a titan, a self-made billionaire. But behind the polished headlines and Forbes covers, Jackson Reed was just a broken man clutching a bottle of formula at 2 a.m., praying his infant sons would stop crying long enough for him to breathe. It had been 10 months since the car crash stole Amelia, his wife, and left him alone to raise their twin boys, Noah and Nathan. 10 months of pretending to be okay while the walls of his mansion echoed with silence. By day, he built empires. By night, he sat in the nursery, frozen, overwhelmed, and grieving. No one saw the cracks. Jackson kept them hidden beneath custom suits and perfect investor pitches. But the truth was simple. He didn't know how to be a father without her. Amelia had been the heart of the home. Her laughter, her routines, her presence had kept everything grounded. Without her, the house felt like a museum of grief, a place where toys stayed, untouched, and lullabies never played. He wasn't absent by choice. He was paralyzed by loss. And though the world praised his strength, Jackson knew better. Strength wasn't the meetings he conquered. It was learning how to hold a baby without shaking. And in that, he was failing, quietly, hopelessly, until the day someone unexpected crossed the threshold, and everything began to change. She didn't look like a hero when she arrived. Elena Brooks was quiet, polite, and slightly tired-looking, the kind of woman people walked past without remembering. To Jackson Reed, she was just the new housekeeper the agency sent. He hadn't interviewed her himself. He didn't have the energy. She was there to clean, to fold, to disappear into the background of a house that had forgotten how to breathe. But that changed the day he came home early. The meeting had been canceled, traffic unusually light. Something in him told him to go home, though he hadn't planned to. He didn't even text his assistant. No driver. Just him, behind the wheel, alone with the hum of the tires and the weight in his chest. The mansion stood still, as always. Too clean, too cold, too quiet. He stepped inside, loosened his tie, and caught a scent faintly floral, familiar but distant. It wasn't Amelia's perfume, but it awakened something just the same. As he moved through the hall, the sound hit him. Laughter. Baby laughter. Sharp, unfiltered joy. He hadn't heard it in months. Jackson followed it, pulled forward like a man chasing a dream he thought he'd buried. And then he saw it. In the kitchen, Elena knelt beside the sink. His twin sons, Noah and Nathan, sat side by side in a makeshift bath, giggling as warm water pooled around them. Their curls clung to their foreheads. Their little feet splashed and kicked. And Elena was humming, not loudly, not performing, just under her breath. A lullaby that seemed to belong in the walls. Her hands moved with care, practiced and instinctual, as if she'd done this 100 times before. Jackson froze. This didn't belong in his house. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt too right. The scene struck something deep and raw. He hadn't seen his sons like this. Not with the nanny. Not with him. They were laughing like they felt safe. Safe enough to be silly. Safe enough to belong. His foot hit the tile harder than he meant. Elena turned, startled. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and something in her posture shifted. Not guilt exactly, but awareness, as if she'd crossed a line. "What are you doing?" His voice came out harsher than intended. She stood slowly, hands raised from the water as though she'd been burned. I thought they had a fever. They were flushed. I couldn't find the thermometer. So I just thought warm water might help. It worked last time. "You were bathing my children," he snapped. "In the kitchen sink. Like they're yours." The words landed heavier than he meant. Her expression dimmed, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to make it look that way. I just I couldn't let them cry like that. Jackson glanced at the boys. Nathan was chewing on a soaked washcloth, unconcerned. Noah blinked up at Elena like she had hung the stars. There was no fear, no tension, only comfort. And that made him angry. "You're not their nanny," he said, stepping forward. "You clean. You don't touch them." She didn't flinch. "There was no one else here," she replied evenly. "And they needed something." Jackson didn't know how to respond. The silence between them stretched long and taut. Finally, he muttered, "Towel them off. Take them upstairs. Then we'll talk." Elena nodded once, scooped Noah up with practiced grace, kissed his damp hair without thinking, and that broke him even more. That was exactly what Amelia used to do. When the house was quiet again, Jackson remained in the kitchen. The floor was wet. A baby sock clung to a stool leg. He picked it up and stared at it like it held answers. He wasn't angry at Elena. Not really. He was angry at himself for needing her to do what he couldn't, for letting a stranger become the one who knew his son's cries better than he did. She hadn't just washed them. She had reached them, and that was something he hadn't done in months. Later that night, Jackson sat in his office, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Elena moved quietly through the halls, never asking for more than the space to serve. But she was already doing more than that. She had brought warmth into a house frozen by grief. He found himself wondering, who was this woman, really? Not just the person folding towels or stacking dishes, but the one who had bathed his sons, like they mattered. Who had made them laugh again. He didn't know if he should fire her or thank her. But he knew this. He had seen something sacred that day. Something intimate. Something he couldn't unsee. And in the soft echoes of baby laughter that still lingered down the hallway, Jackson realized, maybe healing doesn't arrive with ceremony or permission. Maybe it begins with something small. A lullaby. A washcloth. A woman who wasn't supposed to matter. Until she did. The next morning, Elena Brooks folded her blouse with steady hands, but her heart was far from calm. She hadn't been dismissed. Not officially. But Jackson Reed hadn't said a word to her since the moment she'd carried the twins upstairs. At breakfast, he barely looked up from his coffee. His silence wasn't loud but surgical, cold, precise. She'd seen that kind of silence before, the kind that told you exactly where you stood on the edge of the door, waiting to be closed behind you. So, she packed. Not angrily, not with drama, just with the weary grace of someone who'd learned how to leave without being asked. The suitcase was small, worn. It carried her essentials, and the picture of Eli, her younger brother, the boy she had once dropped out of nursing school to care for, the boy whose seizures had shaped her every choice, the boy now gone. She tucked his photo between the folds of a cardigan and zipped the bag. She hadn't expected a thank you or a goodbye. She had crossed a line, and in houses like this, forgiveness wasn't part of the job. What she didn't expect, as her hand reached for the doorknob, was the sound. A sharp cry. Then another. High-pitched. Urgent. Noah. Then Nathan. Elena dropped her bag instantly. That kind of cry. A parent knew it. A caregiver knew it even. Better. She moved before her thoughts did, running up the stairs, past the silent hallway, straight into the nursery. The boys were burning up. Nathan was drenched in sweat, cheeks flushed, limbs kicking in distress. Noah curled into himself, his breathing shallow. Elena crouched beside the crib, hand on Nathan's forehead, already reaching back into memories too painful to ignore. "Same fever," she whispered. But it spiked. Behind her, footsteps thundered. Jackson stood in the doorway, pale, stricken. He didn't move. "We can't wait this time," Elena said, not asking. "If they seize, it gets complicated." Jackson nodded, wordless. They moved as a unit, Elena with Noah, Jackson cradling Nathan. In the kitchen, she directed him without pause. Strip them down to diapers. Cool compresses. Nothing ice cold. We have to lower the fever. Gradually. Her hands worked quickly. A cloth dampened. Another wiped across a tiny forehead. A makeshift electrolyte mix stirred in a bottle. Jackson followed her instructions like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. My brother used to get fevers like this, she murmured. High temps. Rapid breathing. No, meds. So I learned. She handed him a cloth. Guided his hand to the exact spot under Nathan's arm. And in that moment, Jackson cracked. Not because his sons were suffering, but because he realized she had done this before. Not for pay, not for obligation, but out of love. The kind that doesn't require blood. He stared at her. Really looked. Elena, this woman he had nearly pushed out the door, was the one holding his family. Together. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't not. The boys began to cool. Their breathing slowed. The flush in their cheeks faded. Slowly, quietly, relief settled into the kitchen like dust after a storm. Elena slumped back against the wall, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. Jackson sat across from her, still holding Nathan close. He finally asked, voice raw, "What exactly did you just do?" Elena didn't look at him. She didn't need to. My brother Eli had epilepsy. The fevers always came first. I had to drop out of nursing school when our parents passed. I took care of him until... Her voice faded. But it didn't break. It didn't need to. Jackson was silent for a long time. Then quietly he asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her answer was simple. "No one ever asks the maid." The words hit like a stone to the chest. She hadn't been hiding. She had been surviving. And he hadn't seen her. Not really. Not until now. Later that evening, Jackson walked through the linen closet, searching for a clean crib sheet, when a small photograph fluttered to the floor. He picked it up. There she was, Elena, smiling wide, young. Next to her, a boy in a wheelchair with a radiant grin and a wave midair. Eli. The photo was old but cared for. Edges soft, smudged with laundry powder, but loved. Jackson stared at it longer than he meant to. It wasn't just a photo, it was a window into everything he hadn't bothered to ask. She had known suffering, loss, care, and still she gave. Quietly, steadily. That night, he didn't speak to her directly. But when he passed her folding towels in the laundry room, he paused. "Elena," he said. She turned, surprised by the softness in his voice. "You've done more for this house than anyone. For the boys. For me." He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. She nodded gently, accepting it all without ceremony. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It listened. It honored. And from that night forward, Jackson Reed no longer saw Elena as the help. He saw her as the woman who had stepped in, not to replace, but to rebuild. One breath, one bottle, one fever, one lullaby at a time. The fever broke, but something else remained. In the quiet that followed the chaos, Jackson Reed found himself hovering outside the nursery, more often. Not out of duty, but out of something harder to name. Curiosity, guilt, longing, maybe all three. Every night, Elena Brooks would sit in the dim light of the boys' room, a baby nestled in each arm, and sing a lullaby he had never heard before. It wasn't a song from a music box or a children's album. It was something older, raw, real, a soft hymn of memory and survival that carried a grief too heavy to fake and a love too deep to perform. She never sang loudly, never theatrically, just a low, steady hum that filled the room like a kind of sacred warmth. And the boys? They responded immediately. Tiny hands unclenched, breathing steadied, eyelids dropped. Jackson would stand there, hidden just outside the door, listening, not watching listening. Because it wasn't about the way she looked. It was about the way she made the house feel. Again, alive. He didn't understand it at first. It made him uncomfortable. The way her voice touched, something inside him that he thought had sealed shut. But by the third night, he brought a chair from his office and placed it quietly just outside the threshold. He didn't sit. Not yet. But he stayed. Each night, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for an hour. Elena never acknowledged his presence, never turned around. But something in her tone shifted slightly, as if she knew the house was no longer holding its breath alone. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't grand, but it was undeniable. Noah began to giggle in the mornings. Nathan, always the quieter one, started reaching for toys again. Their worlds expanded, slowly, from muted grief into playful curiosity. And Jackson? He began to hum. He didn't notice it at first. A soft echo of Elena's tune would slip from his lips while preparing bottles or walking down the hall. But one night, as he entered the living room, holding a stack of unread emails, he heard it again. This time not from himself, but from Lucas, laughing. A real laugh. Not a squeal. Not a whimper. A full-bodied, high-pitched burst of joy. Jackson froze. He had never heard that sound from Lucas. Not since the accident. Not ever. He turned the corner and found Elena on the rug, surrounded by mixing bowls and wooden spoons, creating a ridiculous percussion concert. Noah was already banging his spoon like a Benson, tiny drummer. But Nathan was sitting off to the side, eyes wide, cautious. Elena paused, leaned toward him playfully, and tapped his nose with the spoon. "You going to join us, or just supervise today, Mr. Nathan?" A twitch. A spark. She crawled toward him, wiggled her fingers, and whispered, "I'm going to get you." The tickle came out of nowhere. And then it happened. That laugh. That breathtaking, unfiltered laugh. Jackson dropped the stack of papers to the couch and just stood there. Elena didn't claim the moment. She didn't turn it into proof of anything. She simply froze, eyes wide with awe, her hand still mid-tickle. And Jackson saw it. Not just the joy in Nathan's face, but the reverence in hers. She knew how precious this was. He stepped into the room slowly, like entering sacred ground. "First time?" she asked softly. Jackson nodded, kneeling beside her, eyes never leaving his son. "I've been trying to make that happen for months. Nothing worked. Not music, not toys, not peekaboo." Elena didn't gloat. She just offered a quiet smile and said, "Sometimes they don't laugh, because they're entertained. They laugh when they feel safe." Safe. The word wrapped around Jackson's chest like a truth he hadn't dared admit. That's what the house had been missing. Not structure, not schedules, not more help. Safety. And somehow, this woman, this quiet, unassuming woman who had packed her bags without being asked, had given them that. She didn't just fill a role. She rebuilt a rhythm. The boys were no longer surviving. They were thriving. And Jackson, he didn't know what to say. So he said the only thing that mattered. "Thank you." It came out soft, barely more than a breath. But Elena heard it. Really heard it. She didn't reply with words. She didn't need to. Her smile deepened, her shoulders relaxed. And for a moment, they just sat there, watching. The twins drummed their wooden spoons against the bowls like tiny symphonists. Jackson leaned back on his hands, soaking it all in. For the first time in months, he wasn't counting mistakes or measuring grief. He was present, fully, and the realization struck him hard and sudden. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after this. Not because she fixed things, but because with her, they didn't have to be fixed to be beautiful. This wasn't about need. It was about belonging. And though he didn't say it yet, didn't dare disrupt the peace that had finally settled, Jackson knew in his gut. Elena Brooks wasn't just helping raise his sons. She was helping him raise himself into the kind of father, the kind of man he had forgotten he could be. Jackson stood in the kitchen that evening, watching the kettle come to a slow boil, his hand resting absently on the counter. The house was quiet, but not in the way it used to be. No, longer cold or haunted, but thoughtful. Like it too was waiting for something to be said. Elena Brooks was in the laundry room, folding a stack of baby clothes with the same quiet rhythm she always had. The lullaby she had sung the night before still lingered in the air, even though no one was humming it now. Jackson had heard it, just like he always did, standing just beyond the nursery door part of the moment, but not quite inside it. That night, though, something had shifted, and he knew it wasn't just in the boys. It was in him. He thought of the photograph he had found, the one of Elena and her brother Eli, both smiling, both carrying stories of survival in their faces. He hadn't asked about it. He didn't need to. But it had changed something in him. For so long, Jackson had only seen Elena through the lens of function, someone who arrived on time, kept the house running, cared for the boys. He hadn't stopped to wonder who she was when she left at night, what her silences carried, what her presence meant. But now he couldn't unsee it. He couldn't unsee the way she held Nathan when he had nightmares, or the way Noah reached for her hand before his bottle. He couldn't ignore how, when Elena entered a room, the tension seemed to ease, not because she demanded attention, but because she brought calm, and that calm had become vital. He didn't know when it happened, but somewhere between the first fever and the first laugh, Jackson had started planning for her to stay without asking her if she wanted to. He'd rehearsed the conversation at least 10 times in his head. It always came out wrong, too. Formal, too emotional, too much. Because the truth was, he wasn't offering her a job anymore. He was offering her something far more vulnerable. A place. A role no one had filled since Amelia passed. He hadn't even realized how much he needed her to stay until the idea of her leaving made the house feel cold again. But when he stepped into the laundry room to speak, the words caught in his throat. Elena looked up from a stack of tiny socks, smiled gently, and continued folding. She looked tired, beautiful, but tired. Not physically, but in that deeper way that comes from giving too much without ever asking for anything in return. Jackson cleared his throat. "Would you like some tea?" Elena blinked, surprised by the offer. "Sure," she said softly. They moved to the kitchen together, and Jackson poured 2 mugs without saying much else. No scripts, no speeches, just quiet. When he handed her the cup, she met his eyes, and he finally said her name, not as an employer, not as a stranger, but as someone who saw her now. "Elena," he said. She looked up, still, calm, waiting. "I just wanted to say." He paused, searching for the words. "You've done a lot. For them, for me. And I see it, I really do." He didn't go further. He didn't ask her to stay. Not yet. But she understood. The silence between them was no longer filled with fear or misunderstanding. It was filled with recognition. She didn't respond with thanks or a smile. Instead, she simply nodded and took a sip of her tea. And in that moment, something unspoken settled between them. Not a contract, not a promise, but an invitation. To be more, to belong. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew. Something had shifted. Later that night, as Elena moved through the nursery, tucking the boys in, she paused by the red doorway. Jackson stood at the end of the hall, watching soft-eyed, quiet. He didn't approach. He didn't need to, because in the way he stood there, in the way he let her finish the lullaby before walking away, she knew. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a place in the story. And in her bones, Elena knew. She wasn't just staying for the boys. She was staying for all of them. Even Jackson. Especially Jackson. And sometimes, the most important invitations are the ones spoken in silence, where hearts shift before words can follow. Elena Brooks stared at the email on her phone for the 3rd time that morning. It was short, simple. A formal offer from Westbriar Community School inviting her to join their early childhood development program as a part-time teaching assistant. The kind of Opportunity she once dreamed of before life happened, before Eli's seizures became constant, before bills replaced textbooks, before silence replaced song. She had applied weeks ago, almost out of habit. She never thought they'd write back, but now they had. And instead of feeling joy, she felt a hollow ache. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To return to education, to build something for herself, to have a life not tied to someone else's children, someone else's grief. And yet, her eyes drifted down the hallway, toward the nursery. The house was unusually still. Noah and Nathan were napping, and for once, Elena wasn't folding laundry or preparing bottles. She was just still. But her heart raced. She hadn't told Jackson Reed about the offer, not because she was hiding it, but because the words wouldn't form. Every time she rehearsed the sentence, "I've been offered something," it felt like she was breaking something tender, something that had only just begun to breathe. And maybe she was, because the truth was, she didn't know if she could leave. Not after the fevers, the late-night lullabies, not after Lucas's first laugh, or the way Noah now leaned into her shoulder like it was home. And not after Jackson began showing up, not just physically but emotionally, watching her, listening, bringing her tea, saying her name like it meant something. But still, she hadn't heard the words. He hadn't asked her to stay. He hadn't said what she meant to him, or if she meant anything at all. So the email sat in her inbox, waiting for an answer. And she waited too. That night, the boys got sick again. It started with a cough from Noah that wouldn't settle, then a fever in Nathan's cheeks. Elena's instincts lit up immediately. Within hours, she had thermometers ready. Fluids, prepped, washcloths cooled. Jackson hovered nearby, visibly anxious but quiet. He didn't try to take over. He just followed her lead. But his eyes never left her, not once. By the second night, Elena hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Her body was running on memory and caffeine. She rocked Nathan gently, humming through a dry throat, willing the fever to break. Jackson stood at the doorway watching her, a bottle of Pedialyte in hand. He looked exhausted too, but it was something else beneath the surface panic maybe. Or guilt. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then turned away. She watched him leave, heart pounding. Something inside her broke a little. Not because he left, but because he still hadn't said anything. It wasn't his silence that hurt. It was the fact that this time, it felt like cowardice. In the hallway, Jackson slid to the floor, back pressed against the wall, hands trembling. He didn't cry often, but now the tears came. Slow, quiet, deep. It wasn't just about the boys. It was about everything. His wife. The way he'd failed to keep his world whole. The way he'd started to hope again. And the fear that maybe it was too late. He didn't know if Elena would leave, but he knew she could. And that scared him more than he'd expected. Elena found him there 20 minutes later. She didn't say a word, just stood in silence, watching the man who had once refused to speak, now crumbling without sound. He didn't see her at first. But when he did, he didn't hide. That was new. He looked at her, eyes rimmed red, voice hoarse. "I don't know how to ask you not to go," he whispered. And there it was. Not a declaration, not a proposal, but something truer. A confession. Elena knelt beside him slowly, her hand brushing against his, grounding him. "I haven't said yes to the school yet," she replied quietly. "I've been waiting." Jackson looked at her, stunned. "For what?" "For you," she said simply. "To see if you were going to fight for this." They sat in silence for a long time. And for once, silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like truth settling, a shared understanding. She wasn't asking for promises. She wasn't demanding guarantees. She just wanted to know she mattered enough to be asked to stay. And now she had, not with grand gestures, but with trembling hands and quiet honesty. As she stood and walked back toward the nursery, Jackson didn't call after her. He didn't need to, because now the door was open, and he wasn't going to let it close again. The auditorium erupted in polite applause, camera flashes pulsing like slow heartbeats. Proud, families leaned forward in their seats, holding bouquets, cell phones, and tears. But Jackson Reed didn't see any of them. He only saw her, Elena Brooks, standing on the stage in a navy cap and gown, a diploma in one hand and the other covering her trembling mouth. Her name had just been called Bachelor of Early Childhood Education, and she stood frozen, blinking against the lights, the moment too big to fully absorb. In the back row, Jackson stood flanked by two very energetic 5-year-olds. Noah was holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Go Mom," in crooked letters and bright blue glitter. Nathan's sign was upside down, mostly stick figures and a heart with all their names inside. They had insisted on making the posters themselves. Jackson hadn't stopped them. He couldn't, because this moment wasn't just Elena's, it was theirs. It was 5 years in the making. 5 years since a stranger had bathed his sons in the kitchen, sink and unknowingly started stitching a broken home back together. 5 years since lullabies replaced silence, and grief made room for grace. As the crowd began to cheer, Elena looked up and saw them. Saw Noah bouncing on his toes. Saw Nathan waving frantically. Saw Jackson smiling, a rare, real smile, the kind that didn't carry weight or calculation. Just joy. She placed her hand over her chest and mouthed one word: always. Later, after the photographs had been taken, some blurry, some perfect, they drove home. Together, the four of them packed into the same SUV that had once carried little boys in car, seats, and late-night fevers. Now it carried glitter-stained posters, a graduation cap with Noah's bite mark in the brim, and a woman who had quietly changed all their lives. The boys argued in the back seat over who got to sit next to Elena at dinner. Jackson drove, one-handed, the other resting gently on her knee. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. That night, over cake and crayons and spilled juice boxes, they found themselves sprawled on the living room rug, exhausted and full. Noah was curled up in Elena's lap. Nathan lay with his head against Jackson's shoulder. And then came the voice that paused everything. "Can you sing the song, Mommy?" Nathan asked softly. "Time stille." Elena glanced at Jackson, unsure, but his eyes held nothing but permission. So she nodded and began. The song wasn't famous, wasn't polished, but it was theirs. A soft, ancient melody once, hummed for her brother, then whispered to two fevered infants, then carried through halls that once knew only silence. Now it was a lullaby of celebration. Jackson joined her by the second verse, tentative, off-key but sincere. The boys leaned in, already drifting. The house, once a mausoleum of memory, now pulsed with life, with light. When the final note faded, Nathan whispered, "Can you sing it again?" Elena smiled and replied, "Always." That word hung in the air like a vow, not just to sing, but to stay, to keep showing up, to keep loving, even when no one was looking. Jackson leaned his head back, eyes closed, listening not just to the song but to the rhythm of belonging, of knowing he no longer had to carry the weight alone. Later that night, as the boys snored gently in their room, Jackson walked to the living room and found Elena folding one last blanket. He didn't speak right away, just watched her, hands steady, strong, familiar. Then he said the words he had waited years to say. "We're a family." Elena turned slowly, eyes shining. "It doesn't take blood," he added, stepping closer. "Just courage." She nodded, silent. No tears this time, only truth. They had built something real, not in courtrooms or contracts, but day by day, in fevered nights, in lullabies, in tiny, invisible acts of love. And that night, in a house that had once been defined by what it lost, there was no more room for absence, only presence, only laughter, only home. It wasn't the song that changed everything. It was the choice to stay. Elena Brooks didn't stay because she was asked. She stayed because she saw something worth staying for. A family not yet whole, but trying. And Jackson Reed didn't ask her to stay out of their desperation. He asked because he finally understood that love isn't about replacing what's lost. It's about building something new with what remains. Noah and Nathan didn't need someone who could take their mother's place. They needed someone who could meet them where they were, hold them through the fevers, laugh with them through the chaos, and sing them back to peace. And that's what Elena gave them. She didn't wear a title. She wore presence. She didn't ask to be seen, but she was. And in the quiet corners of a once broken home, she stitched a new kind of family together, with lullabies, gentleness, and courage. The most powerful kind of love isn't loud or perfect. It's consistent. It shows up, quietly, every day, even when it's hard. Whether you're healing, helping, or holding on, you matter. Your presence has the power to change someone's life, even if they don't say it out loud. What part of this story stayed with you? Have you ever experienced quiet love like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another moment like this. Your support helps us keep telling stories that honor love, healing, and hope. See you in the next chapter.